Hello there. Today, we will unveil the secrets of one of the most notorious crime syndicates in Heilongjiang Province, China. For 13 years, the entire city of Qiqihar in this province was shrouded in darkness, ruled by a ruthless force. The masterminds behind this were neither officials nor businessmen, yet they held absolute power, manipulating everything like shadowy kings. They were two blood brothers born in the same household. The people called them the Great Landlord and the Little Landlord, the ones who spread terror and controlled Qiqihar for over a decade. At that time, just hearing their names sent shivers down the spines of the locals. Their reputation alone made people's legs go weak. Anyone who crossed them and managed to escape unscathed was considered incredibly lucky. Most who dared to oppose the Great Landlord and Little Landlord met the same fate, either left crippled or turned into restless spirits. So how, in an era of law and order, did these two men manage to reign with such impunity? What crimes did they commit? And ultimately, how were they finally brought to justice? The past of the Zhang brothers. In the frigid lands of Heilongjiang Province, where winter stretches endlessly and snow blankets the sky, there lies a city called Qiqihar. Ironically, this peaceful land gave birth to the most brutal criminals in the province's history. These two were not born into power or raised in luxury. They started as mere brothers in the Zhang family of Qiqihar. The elder brother, Zhang Jixin, was born in 1958. As the eldest son of a poor family, he grew up in hardship, his hands calloused from years of labor. On freezing winter nights, he trudged through snow-covered streets, scavenging for coal scraps to survive. But those tough years forged his hands into iron, hands that could snap a man's bones as easily as breaking a dry twig. Since childhood, Zhang Jixin had a penchant for violence, bullying kids his age. His peers feared him, never daring to provoke his wrath. Even as a child, he was called Big Brother, a title he relished. If Zhang Jixin was a wild beast with raw power, then his younger brother, Zhang Jiwen, born in 1968, was a venomous snake. Spoiled from birth, he never had to toil like his elder brother. He lacked brute strength but possessed something far more terrifying, a cold, calculating mind full of cunning schemes. He didn't need fists to dominate. He manipulated, deceived, and controlled everything to his advantage. While his brother relied on brute force, Zhang Jiwen used strategy to corner his enemies. Like his elder brother, he too became a feared figure among his peers. However, one commonality between the Zhang brothers was their disdain for education. Books and studies never interested them. After finishing middle school, Zhang Jixin roamed the streets, immersing himself in the criminal underworld, picking fights to establish his reputation. His parents repeatedly pleaded with him to change his ways, but he only responded with sneers and defiance. As the saying goes, walk by the river long enough, and your shoes will eventually get wet. In 1980, the law finally caught up with the wild beast. Zhang Jixin was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for hooliganism. People thought that prison would reform him, that he would return a changed man. But they were wrong. Incarceration did not break him. Instead, it made him more ruthless, more fearless. After his release, Zhang Jixin wasted no time assembling a gang of drifters and thugs, vagrants who lived by the knife and would do anything for money. Under his command, they grew stronger, taking over protection rackets, collecting debts, and even brazenly robbing people in broad daylight. He wasn't just another street thug, he was a predator, eliminating anyone who stood in his way. However, what truly solidified his infamy across Heilongjiang's underworld was a brutal gang war. The underworld purge that shook Heilongjiang. In 1990, during a territorial dispute, Zhang Jixin personally took down a notorious crime boss named Ma Mu, leaving him critically injured. Ma Mu was one of the biggest names in the underground world, known for his ruthless ways. People even called him Ma the Emperor, signifying his immense power. Yet, Zhang Jixin managed to defeat Ma the Emperor in a direct confrontation. This cemented his name among the most feared criminals in Heilongjiang. However, the price of his recklessness was another stint in prison, this time for intentional assault. While Zhang Jixin served his sentence, his younger brother Zhang Jiwen had matured. Unlike his brother, he didn't need to fight to prove his dominance. He didn't use brute strength because his mind was sharper than any blade. After finishing middle school, he took a quieter approach. At first, he sold street food and ran a small baozi shop to make ends meet. But he despised the small change earned through honest work. He wasn't born for hardship. He believed that with his intelligence, he could amass great wealth without breaking a sweat. Looking around, he saw wealthy men living lavishly without lifting a finger. And in his mind, a dangerous thought sparked. Make money fast, but not through hard work. Then, in the winter of 1993, his opportunity arrived. China's 4th Engineering Bureau was preparing to install underground fiber optic cables in Qiqihar. When Zhang Jiwen learned about this, he immediately set his sights on the project, intending to exploit it for profit. With the help of one of his father's old colleagues, he successfully won the contract. However, he never intended to conduct honest business. Just like his brother, he chose violence and deception to make money. After securing the contract, he quickly gathered his brother's old crew and recruited new thugs to expand his ranks. But their work had nothing to do with actual construction. Instead, they used every possible means to exploit laborers. They hired workers for the project, only to later intimidate, beat, and threaten them to avoid paying wages. Through this scheme, Zhang Jiwen embezzled what should have been the workers' salaries, totaling 1.7 million yuan, an astronomical sum in the 1990s. This meant that hundreds of workers were conned and brutally exploited. However, he didn't keep all the money for himself. He was smarter than his brother. He knew that survival required sharing. After taking his cut, he distributed the rest to his henchmen and those who helped him secure the project. Within 2 years, Zhang Jiwen effortlessly pocketed 800,000 yuan without lifting a single brick. That easy fortune convinced him that violence and oppression were the best ways to get rich. From then on, he aggressively recruited more criminals, ex-convicts, and skilled fighters to strengthen his power. Once he had a solid crew, Zhang Jiwen set his sights on darker enterprises. He realized that compared to exploiting laborers, the sex trade, gambling, and drug trafficking were even more lucrative. So, in 1995, he began constructing the Golden Dragon Bay Hotel, a notorious hub for illicit activities. But where did the building materials come from? What's shocking is that all the construction materials, bricks, cement, steel, were obtained through sheer force. Zhang Jiwen wrote countless fraudulent checks to suppliers, acquiring materials without paying. If any supplier dared question him or demand payment, his men would storm their warehouses, assault them, and even threaten their families. In the end, out of sheer terror, the suppliers surrendered, providing him with everything without further complaints. And it didn't stop there. Zhang Jiwen even brazenly seized construction machinery, excavators, cranes, cement mixers, all snatched from legitimate contractors. In other words, he built his criminal empire without spending a dime, exploiting both workers and businesses alike. However, the money did not just fall into his pocket. He was smarter than his older brother. He knew that to stay in power, he had to share. After taking the money, he kept a portion for himself and distributed the rest to his subordinates and those who helped him win the project. In just 2 years, Zhang Jiji easily pocketed 800,000 yuan without lifting a finger. This easy fortune convinced him that violence and oppression were the best ways to get rich. From then on, he continuously recruited ex-convicts, thugs, and skilled fighters to strengthen his forces. Once he had enough men, Zhang Jiji decided to expand into even darker businesses. He realized that compared to exploiting workers, prostitution, gambling, and drug trafficking were far more lucrative. Once completed, the Jinlongluan Grand Hotel became the official headquarters of Zhang Jiji's gang. Within its walls, they ran a full-scale criminal operation, from prostitution and gambling to drug trafficking. Everyone in the city of Qiqihar knew this place was a crime den, yet no one dared to report it. The reason was simple. A man once tried to report the illegal activities at the hotel. But his bravery was met with brutality. Zhang Jiji's gang shot him in the leg, crippling him for life. After this incident, no one dared to speak out again. Yet, what terrified people even more was the absolute inaction of the police. Zhang Jiji remained untouchable. Money and power had placed him above the law. The reunion of the two brothers, an empire of fear. Not long after, Zhang Jixin was released from prison. He was even more ruthless and vicious than his younger brother. Once he set his sights on a target, he never showed mercy. With his return, Zhang Jiji's gang became even more brazen, running unchecked. They not only robbed civilians, but also forcibly took over businesses, seizing companies through sheer violence. By the year 2000, the Zhang brothers had control over 70% of all businesses and enterprises in Qiqihar. From real estate and hotels, to car dealerships, everything was under their grip. To the people, Zhang Jixin was the great landlord, a ruler who governed through sheer brute force. Zhang Jiji, on the other hand, was the little landlord, the venomous snake manipulating everything from the shadows. In 2001, a brave individual penned a letter of accusation, detailing the full extent of the Zhang brothers' crimes. The letter was a desperate cry for help, a sliver of hope in a city drowning in fear, but that hope was quickly extinguished. The letter never reached the right hands. No one knew where it had disappeared, and no one dared ask what had happened to the person who wrote it. The Zhang brothers, now drunk on power, became even more insane. They robbed, raped, and extorted businessmen. There was no crime they wouldn't commit. They were no longer mere street thugs. They had become the undisputed tyrants of Qiqihar. One day in 2001, Zhang Jiji's wife, Xiaomao, went to a karaoke bar. A simple dispute over song selection led to an argument with a man named Wu Mo, who was singing in the room next door. At the time, Wu Mo had no idea that this woman was the wife of the infamous little landlord. So he didn't back down and argued right back. What started as an exchange of words quickly escalated into a physical altercation. Both sustained minor injuries. It seemed like the matter would end there, but Xiaomu refused to let it go. When she returned home, she recounted everything to her husband. Upon hearing the story, Zhang Jiji flew into a rage. A man like him, who ruled the city through fists and bullets, was actually challenged by someone on his own turf? This wasn't just an insult. It was a direct provocation. Upon learning about the incident, his right-hand man, Wang Wei, acted immediately. Without waiting for an order from Zhang Jiji, he led a group of men to hunt down Wu Mo. However, when they arrived at Wu Mo's house, he was nowhere to be found. Only his sister and 3 of his friends were inside, playing mahjong. Wang Wei stormed in angrily, and upon realizing that Wu Mo was not there, he vented his rage on those inside. He and his men brutally assaulted Wu Mo's sister and another man named Tang Mao, who resisted the most. Afterward, they kidnapped both victims and took them to a VIP room at the Jinlong Lone Grand Hotel, where Zhang Juwen was already waiting. As soon as they arrived, Zhang Juwen ordered his men to beat them mercilessly. They didn't just use their fists and feet, but also employed clubs and other blunt objects to torture them. As a result, Wu Mo's sister suffered a shattered kneecap, while Tang Mo was left with a broken brow bone and a torn lip. Meanwhile, they discovered that Wu Mo was hiding in a hospital. Without hesitation, Wang Wei and his men rushed to the hospital and assaulted him there as well. Terrified for his life, Wu Mo fled Qiqihar city the very next day, desperately trying to escape Zhang Juwen's violent grip. To consolidate their power, the Zhang brothers amassed a large cache of weapons. They didn't just carry firearms for fights, but also brought them to business negotiations. In reality, these meetings were nothing more than armed robberies. If anyone refused to cooperate, they would immediately be threatened at gunpoint. Because of this, there was no deal in Qiqihar city that Zhang Jiten and Zhang Juwen couldn't negotiate successfully. Even their gambling operations were run with sheer brutality. In the casinos they controlled, no one could walk away with their winnings. If someone won too much, they were beaten into submission. Because of this, fewer and fewer people dared to set foot in their gambling dens. But things didn't stop there. Zhang Jiten devised an even more ruthless plan. Instead of waiting for people to come and gamble, he started calling them directly, inviting them to play. Once someone received his call, they dared not refuse, fearing deadly retaliation. Unlike his brother, Zhang Juwen sought to legitimize his image. He registered multiple legal businesses and insisted on being addressed as the chairman of the board. He wanted to shed the label of a gangster. However, no matter how much he tried to change his public image, his criminal nature remained the same. His companies were mere fronts. Behind the scenes, he continued evading taxes, running illegal casinos, prostitution rings, drug trafficking, and extorting businesses. The crimes committed by the Zhang brothers had reached an unforgivable level, severely impacting the lives of Qiqihar's residents. But as the saying goes, the heavens have eyes, and evil deeds will always be repaid in kind. In 2003, an anonymous letter arrived at the Heilongjiang Provincial Police Department, exposing the horrifying crimes of the Zhang brothers. The dark secrets they had buried for years were finally coming to light, prompting authorities to take immediate action. A special task force, codenamed 4 and 28, was secretly assembled to launch an undercover investigation into Qiqihar's most notorious crime syndicate. But these criminals were no ordinary thugs. As soon as the task force began its operation, Zhang Juwen sensed danger. A leak from within the police force reached his ears, ringing alarm bells of the approaching storm. Without hesitation, he ordered his finance department to destroy all financial records. He thought this would erase the evidence, but he was gravely mistaken. Some things could never be burned away. The victims they had beaten, robbed, and terrorized were still there, living testimonies of their crimes. Moreover, some individuals had kept the fraudulent checks that the Zhangs had issued. These crucial pieces of evidence played a key role in exposing the entire criminal empire. After 4 months of intense investigation, the police had gathered enough evidence to bring charges against the Zhang brothers. Against all odds, the task force successfully arrested the entire gang. On July 18, 2004, the Intermediate People's Court of Hagang City held a public trial for the shocking underworld case that had gripped the nation. The court's verdict was swift and severe. Zhang Jutin, the leader of the crime syndicate, was sentenced to immediate execution. Zhang Juwen received life imprisonment. 30 other accomplices received prison sentences ranging from 3 to 20 years. Additionally, 13 corrupt officials who had enabled their crimes were also held accountable and punished accordingly. With this, the most notorious criminal organization in Qiqihar City was completely dismantled. The people, who had lived in fear for over a decade, finally breathed a sigh of relief, welcoming the return of peace and stability. Justice had finally prevailed. Zhang Jitin and Zhang Juwen had once believed that power and wealth could shield them from the consequences of their actions. But they were wrong. No wall is high enough to conceal the guilty from the eyes of justice.